Welcome to the DeFi podcast, where we attempt to imagine the future of crypto because foresight is what makes great investors. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment. All statements made by hosts or guests are strictly beliefs or point of views and are not recommendations to buy, sell, or hold any security. Hosts or guests may hold certain securities discussed in this podcast.
Hello and welcome to the DeFi podcast. Today our guest is Andy Boyan. Andy's an expert in game mechanics. He was recently a team member at Chainlink and is currently the co-founder of Infinity Keys. Today we'll discuss GameFi, game mechanics, and what is Infinity Keys.
Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here, you guys.
Thanks for coming on.
I guess I'll start with my first question, which is GameFi has been touted by some as sort of like the killer app that could bring a billion users to blockchains. Meta sort of has like this Ready Player One view of the space, or at least that's what it seems like from the outside. And other people just believe it's a bunch of Ponzi-nomics and gambling, offers no real utility to gamers. Sort of the big question, what is your take and what is your view of GameFi and its potential?
It's awesome to be here, you guys. I love talking gaming. I've studied gaming for many, many years. And so I appreciate you having me on. I think it's interesting to dig into GameFi as a term specifically. Sometimes we mean Web3 gaming, which means gaming with blockchain-related stuff. And sometimes it means purely the financial aspect of games and potential games and ownership. And sometimes it's broader. Sometimes it can include things like what we would consider traditional games with microtransactions. I mean, a lot of the things that we look at in GameFi right now, where you do in-game purchases, and you have these economies, and you have like these second-party marketplaces, those exist in many games already, whether or not they're on a blockchain or verified by a number of nodes. Many of those structures already exist. So I think it's important to look at those sorts of things as we create GameFi. Now, last year, GameFi emerged as this term because of Axie and PegAxie and all these sort of games that had this play-to-earn mechanic. And so that's not the only thing that GameFi is, play-to-earn, but sort of central to this idea is that you can have the assets, you can own the assets yourself. What I think is interesting about that is people talk about owning your assets, but what they're really getting at is selling your assets. You can sell your assets if you want to, and that's finance. But to me, that misses a much larger portion of what's interesting about Web3 and about blockchain systems and EVM and composability. That's a piece of it, is you can own these assets, but that's far from all of it. So to circle back around, when it comes to GameFi, I think it is it's an interesting place to start a conversation because you think about owning assets and there's this speculative element there. But when it comes to game design and adoption and actual fun games, it goes far deeper than finance and being able to sell your stuff. There's a lot more to games than just that aspect.
It's definitely interesting to talk to somebody who's been on the sort of development side of this because while you've been, in the game, I guess you've been in the game industry for a while, right?
In a research capacity and then player for, 40 years. And I was a games researcher. So that's kind of my background, is where I came from, is how do players interact with games? What kind of games do they like to play? What are the effects when they play games? And then moving into the game design space. And more recently, as crypto blew up. And we're not just a game only. We're a platform for doing interesting things with games. But that is certainly a piece of it, yes.
It's pretty cool because I've been on the other side as somebody who's played a lot of games throughout my whole life. So can you kind of break down where you see GameFi going, or as you say, like Web3 gaming going in the future? You lightly touched on some of the other projects that have been around, but from my perspective, as somebody who, I've been playing video games since I was like 4 years old, right? I look at a lot of these Web3 or GameFi products, and they don't really look like games to me. They kind of look a little bit like gambling.
They look like DeFi, right? You stake and you earn, and then some stuff happens.
Yeah, sometimes I'm kind of like, where's the gameplay at, though?
Huge criticism of GameFi and Web3 gaming last year is, well, let's fund it, let's get all the money, and then we'll figure out the game. And a lot of projects did that, and there's a lot of problems with that. Obviously, we've kind of seen because they're related to the markets and it's weirdly speculative, and there's Ponzonomics in many cases. So there are challenges there. But your question was like, where is this stuff going? So something that the research is very clear about games research is there are many different kinds of games for many different types of players. And while that seems like very straightforward, it's our inclination as individuals to think about gaming from the games that you play. So if you grew up playing shooters and you're thinking about shooters and you're thinking about hardcore, gamers as shooters, most of the people who play those games forget that Wordle and Sudoku and crossword puzzles are one of the highest played amount of games, like the player base for them rivals first-person shooters, casual games, and puzzle games. Mobile games that you download and you play for a week and then you get rid of. Massive market, microtransactions. People spend 50 cents, $1, but millions and millions of people do that week after week after week. It doesn't fall into all these sort of standard categories of RTS games and strategy games and MMORPGs. So that's something really important to think about when you ask, where is GameFi going? What's happening with these games? First, there's a lot of different types of games that crypto and the Web3 industry has not touched, has not gotten involved with yet, and hasn't made a big impact. And a lot of that is because, if you're crypto native, there's a high overlap in the Venn diagram of people who played hardcore games, shooters and role-playing games and RuneScape and World of Warcraft with people who then got into crypto. And so when people who are in crypto and Web3 start thinking about games, those are the types of things they think about. And a lot of the games, like the really low-hanging fruit for use cases for Web3 is like trading cards, Pokemon games, Digimon games, collecting games. And that's how NFTs kind of blew up, is this sort of collection mechanic. So while there are these elements of you can own your items, you can own your cards, you can sell your cards, they might go up in value. The answer to your question of where is GameFi going is, I think we're going to see way more different types of games. There's so much room for different audiences who want to play games for different reasons. Just the reasons that people play games. With GameFi, it became pretty clear that the reason people were playing these games is to make money. And that's it. And they didn't have to be fun because they weren't playing the games to have fun. It was fun to make money. And when number go up, that's exciting, right? It is an arousing experience. It's very enjoyable. And it feels a lot like a gaming experience where you have that enjoyment. And so it feels game-like in that way. But there are many other types of experiences that people have with games that are also enjoyable, that are not number go up. They're arousing, maybe because they're competitive and you can defeat an opponent. Whether or not you take money from them or whatever it is, right? You can still get those experiences. Or the millions and millions of players who play not for those arousal, competitive, and challenge motivations, but for social motivations. People who like to play because other people are playing and they like to talk about it. People who like to play a game because they think it's interesting and they want to watch the walkthroughs or join a Twitch stream with a streamer and hang out with the community and be have your little code words that you use. It's not only about the competitive edge, the winning, the earning in GameFi's case. It's about many more other kinds of things. So when it comes to GameFi, I think we will continue to explore the different genres that can be used in Web3 gaming. Which is why we're building Infinity Keys. It's not meant to be a play-to-earn game. It's meant to tap into a lot of these other sort of use cases and drives. And that's what I think. There are components of Web3 and blockchain systems and the EVM in particular that games will begin to use more and more of and tap into new game mechanics that are really interesting and really fun for different reasons.
5 to 10 years from now, how do you sort of imagine the world? Let me be a bit more specific. The different types of games, the shooter action games, the role-playing games, casual games, mobile games. You see a little bit of everything coming to the blockchain, or just specific games are going to be on the blockchain, other games will not. What is your sort of most realistic assessment?
So over the past 20 years, the games industry, traditional games industry, has done a really good job of figuring out what's a profitable structure for a game design studio and a publisher to exist. And how do we as an industry, how does the games industry survive? And one of those structures that stands out pretty well is there are major publishers and locations where many games are sold. So the Xbox Marketplace, the PlayStation Marketplace, the Nintendo Switch Marketplace, Steam Marketplace. Those are these places where major titles go and live, and that's where a majority of the things come up. When a marketplace like that, when a platform like that emerges that features blockchain games, it will probably be a home for many of those large titles. Now, what's really interesting about those marketplaces and those platforms is there's also a ton of room for indie games and smaller games. And so there's an opportunity for a lot of different types of games to come out on those platforms if you adhere to their standards and their requirements. And so I think there will always be that. I think there's going to be this mass market appeal of if there's blockchain elements, you might not know it or it would be optional. And I think about Nintendo, they have these little figurines. I can't remember what they're called, but like you go buy them at the store and then you put them on top of your Nintendo and you touch them and then you get a special character, an unlockable in the game. NFTs and Web3 stuff will probably be like that, where some games will have them and they'll be optional and they'll give you benefits, but they won't be game-breaking benefits. Because if they are game-breaking, then they'll exclude all these other players that they don't want to, right? It's in the games industry's interest to be more inclusive. Now, that said, there's also a lot of room now, and there will be in the future, for indie games and indie platforms. And you can just go and play games in browser and play casual games. Like we just said, Wordle and Sudoku and crossword puzzles and Scrabble and Monopoly and poker and all these things that are, they're not through those traditional mass market systems. They're independent. And those are often more difficult because of discovery reasons for independent publishers and game designers, but they're still there and you can still make money on them. And there's some challenges there. A lot of indie game designers have challenges because you can't get into the Apple Store, you can't get into the Steam Marketplace or have success there. And that's where I think we'll see, I think that's where Web3 will live. It'll be on those platforms as another option. You want to do an indie game, you want to do a Web3 game, here it is, and we've got to figure out some discovery mechanisms. And there will be some homes like the Steam Marketplace that feature Web3 games. I know there's a lot of places trying to be the home for games on the web. GameStop is trying to be, an NFT very friendly Web3 place. Maybe that'll be a place that has success there. Immutable as well is they're trying to be a chain and a platform and have like a home for many of those games. So I suspect it will still be widely varied. It'll be all over the place, and people will sort of gravitate to the genres that they know and like, and the platforms that they trust. When you spin up your smart TV and see what can you watch, what can you play, the default options are what a lot of people choose because they're there. It's easy. They know it's going to work with their system. As publishers and hardware manufacturers and all those places get vertically aligned with crypto adoption and Web3 adoption, then those things will start to emerge. And so just like you can go on your TV now, I can go to my basic stuff, my Netflix, my Disney, my HBO. I might be able to go to some lesser known stuff as well. That's where games will live. There'll be some of those on marketplaces as well.
You mentioned the Steam platform, right? It reminded me of... if you think about like TF2 and Counter-Strike and these games that started a few years ago coming out with this whole loot box system where in the game you could get these sort of rare cosmetics, right? And some of them would be super rare and some of them would be super common. And it created an actual in-game market. Like you can actually go, there's almost like a stock market for these items in the Steam Marketplace. And so I'm wondering what kind of extra usability or like increased value is Web3 going to offer to a system like this where you kind of already have these different, in-game items that are tradable. Some of them are actually worth money. What does Web3 improve on top of like existing systems?
I think that's a huge question and we don't know the answer to. Okay. What incentive does Steam have to have items that can leave the Steam Marketplace? What incentive does PlayStation have to have items that can leave the PlayStation Marketplace? Oh, you can use these on PlayStation Marketplace or Xbox or Switch or Steam. Why would Sony ever want that? They wouldn't, right? Like they want to keep things inside their garden. So this is the fight. It's the same thing with Apple and NFTs. Does Apple want NFTs in the App Store? No. Why would they? They want the purchases inside the App Store. It is all of their incentives are aligned to be their own centralized company. So where does the value come in? It comes in for somebody who might try to displace that market, which means it's a lot more risk. Who's going to win over Steam and Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo and Apple and Android? Like that's a huge question. Now, the value in there is there's two things. One is what people mostly talk about is players will want it because it gives them more freedom. And if players demand it and all the players rise up and want assets that will move from Steam to wherever they go, then eventually the platforms will have to fall in line and just play ball with the users. I don't think we know the answer to whether or not players actually want that. When GameFi got big last year, a lot of the gaming community, not all of it, but a lot of it rose up and said, we don't want this. You're already gouging us with microtransactions. We don't want NFTs where you'll just do the same thing. Whether or not that is the case, that's what they thought. And then the narrative got lost about crypto and Web3 and environment and like everything. It just kind of all got put together in a big concrete mixer and mixed around. So that's thing one is the big platforms, they probably don't have an incentive to do that right now. An upstart, a competitor could and try to add that as value. And if that value catches on and it is desirable, then yeah, maybe it could work. Now, for me, I'm a game designer. And what's interesting about it to me is I can make different kinds of games if assets and items are composable with others across different games and platforms and systems. So I'm not as interested in the finance side. I'm a lot more interested in the technology side, in what that allows me to build. It's really interesting to me to have a sword from a game on Steam that I can check and look at and use in another game. And now maybe the stats don't come over because, the different mechanics and balance are different, but still maybe I can bring that over and use it as an artifact. And that gives me a special halo effect, a visual effect or graphics. That's where things get really interesting to me. And where I think the future will go is in composability. Now, we said we're going to talk DeFi. The killer feature of DeFi is composability. You deposit your assets in a lending pool and you get a placeholder token, and I can go and I can take those and deposit them somewhere else and get credit for having done that because we're trying to feature partnerships, and I can build my strategy and loop things around them and do that whole DeFi game. And that's what made DeFi really killer. It was like, I can just as an individual, I can use my own assets as collateral here, and here, and my positions can go really deep. And it was permissionless too. As a builder, I could come in and say like, okay, well now your collateral can be used over here too, and do that. That has not yet been explored in gaming, and people talked about it briefly with Loot, the project Loot. And there was this moment in time in Web3 gaming where it was like, okay, if we have an item, you can use that item or a set of item in a variety of different play spaces. And that turned out to be really hard to do, but the potential for that, the idea of using composable assets as signifiers of some value somewhere in games, not necessarily financial value, but stats value or identity value or fantasy value or social value or something like that, that has yet to be fully explored. And that's where I personally, that's how we're building Infinity Keys is there's a lot more game design potential there to pull in composable assets. That lets me do the things that are really cool in crypto where if I want to partner with a game, I don't have to steal their users. We do things together, and we share the same user base, and we can pull those sort of things together and combine that with another set of user base, and then we can all go into a metaverse, crypto voxels together, and do something combined because those assets are composable, the users become composable, all the wallet technology talks to each other. That's really cool. Now, if you've got a bunch of different smaller independent communities who are coming together to play games together and build these communities, and there's some economy that emerges around that as well. Now, a larger platform like a Steam, like a Xbox, whatever it happens to be, you can't ignore that. That's where I think we make a difference is in the actual technology. You build games that are worth playing from a composable asset that you couldn't do otherwise. So sorry, I got off on a tangent there because I get really excited about composability and game mechanics and like what can we actually build with Web3? That's the advantage. It's not what we can buy. there is permissionlessness and there is, uncensorability if you build that out in those ways. But when it comes to gaming, it's got to be composability. It's the thing that makes the most sense. That it's the coolest killer feature that I can talk from one game to another game to another game, and I can let other people build that too. We can build whatever we want using this.
Yeah, so strategically, it's really interesting for a new game designer that can invite users from the previous game with those assets to this new game. Are there any technical roadblocks to doing this? Can the first game sort of block the usage of those artifacts on the next game, or is it once I have this NFT in my wallet, from a technical standpoint, the new game can just create an environment where that can be used? That's it. It's permissionless. It's mine. How does that work out, logistically?
Well, there's quite a few ways to structure it technically. So pulling the exact item as an NFT into your game might be able to work. There are some limitations to it. So some games can set it up so some of that data is not available, or they're using it in a slightly different way. So oftentimes if you pull in an NFT into a game and the game is actually centralized and run on a server, that game then looks at the NFT and says, okay, we're going to make these values happen because of what's on that NFT. And so as a different game, if I make that, I can look at that NFT, but I might not know the exact values and the mechanics and the algorithm behind it. So there can be technical barriers there, and that comes with centralization and ownership and IP. But a really simple alternative to that is I don't have to have the sword that you collected in one game. I don't have to have the same stats. I bring it over, and for infinity keys, you collect keys through riddles and puzzles and use those to open treasures and advance. You bring your sword over, I don't need you killing monsters. I need you to use that as a key, and that's an artifact, and that lets you advance. And so I can use these assets however I want. They're permissionless if it's on chain, if it's public record, because I can see what the contract address is and whether the wallet holds it or not, and that's enough. And there's many more sort of things you can do with NFTs to each other. You bring two together and you can mint another one because you hold both of these. You can do these gating functions, and so that's what we do right now. Is you come to Infinity Keys and you mint an NFT for everything. And they're 1155s. They're cheap. They're free to mint, and you just mint them. And so we're trying to figure out what to do, because now we got a lot of NFTs. We got to figure out which ones do we burn? How do we do that? But that's a game design issue, not a technology issue. So there are some technical limitations, but it's just a matter of figuring out what's the best structure to organize how it works, and whether to mint a new one or not, and how to integrate it into your own game. And those sorts of things. One of the hardest things right now is I mint a ton of NFTs because we mint these keys for Infinity Keys puzzles. And when you go to where do you look at your NFTs? That I go to OpenSea still. I go to my profile because I just haven't learned to go anywhere else. And it's a total disaster. It's a mess of all these NFTs that I've collected for now years, many of which are totally useless and have nothing to do with anything I'm doing. That's not a technical problem. That's just a problem to be solved, and we'll organize that. Somebody will figure out how to organize that nicely. Maybe we will. So the technical barriers are the same as they are for DeFi. The thing that takes the most time, I heard I think Brandon Asselstein from Pool Together talking about this. The thing that was taking his team the most time was integrating wallets. You got to integrate 1 million wallets because you got to, be friends with everybody, and everybody uses a different wallet. And it's some of the things that they're not technical barriers. They're time barriers and UX barriers and what's the payoff of integrating another wallet and things like that. So technical barriers are pretty low.
Do you think there's going to be some kind of benefit, let's say, to having something similar to a Unicode, having UTF, except in the realm of crypto and NFTs, right? Somebody who creates a standard that everyone comes together to accept this standard. So big NFT producers and indie NFT producers for game assets are going to try, let's say, maybe use the same standard, so that the multitude of actual game developers who want to include these items, if there was one standard, do you think that would actually, first of all, would this work? Is there enough coordination in this sort of environment for something like this to come together? And would people actually adopt this?
So it could work. There are many token standards that are released that kind of allow for different structures of NFTs. One of the coolest ones that nobody's ever heard of is ERC 50/50. And it allows you to modify NFTs through other NFTs. And the guy who made it, it's an open source token standard, and he made a kind of a game and an art thing out of it where you cast a spell on an NFT and it changes its state, or it changes its maybe it's metadata. I can't remember exactly, but it's cool. So there are these things where there are standards where you could go in and say, we propose a token standard that says, if you're going to have a game item, here are the features that it needs to have, or at least statistics, or at least how it's formatted, so that we can go and make readable stuff that's readable. That is absolutely possible. And the question is, who would lead that, and would a community rally around that? The Ethereum community has clearly said, when there are complex tasks to be done with many moving parts, we can coordinate together and make them run. That's what the merge was. And so all sorts of, was it 1144? All sorts of, really interesting token standards and changes. Complex things can be done by large distributed communities if its incentives are aligned right and it's done well. I think gaming is a little bit too young right now to do that, because instead of like one clear standard of we're going to proof of stake like the merge, everybody kind of wants to be, if there's a token standard, I want to own it, right? I want to be the one who kind of like puts it out and decides what's in it. And so right now, I think people are still grasping at those early stages of what is gaming going to look like on chain? What chain are we gaming on? How much are we putting off chain? What is on chain gaming? Like, I think there's too many questions around that to do that now. But as the industry evolves and grows, and we'll start to find like, where are those places where games are linking together and are connecting? And then we'll start to see some of those things emerge. Right now, like we get an idea for a new game. I get an idea for a new kind of game every day. And I say, hey, I go to my team, like, can we do this? And the answer is always like, yes, but it's going to take a while. Like, we're going to have to figure out like how to rebuild NFTs in this way. And that's weird. Or like, does minting work this way? And so there's always these kind of questions. Yeah, we can do stuff technically, but we'll wait for some of those standards to emerge. And we're just starting to see that now with wallets. Like, I mean, how long has crypto been going on with wallets? We've had MetaMask for, I don't know how long, 6 years, 7 years. And still wallet projects get funded because a new UX and a new way to do it. There's a million wallets, and we still haven't quite figured out some of this really basic stuff. So when it comes to game standards, yes, absolutely possible. Way too early. I think we have to see, what kind of games are there, and what do people want to do with them, and do they want to sell their assets? Do people want to rent? What composable features are there? There's just way too many questions to ask before we start to get into anything consistent.
So we've addressed a little bit what the future could look like. I'm curious what you think about the present. You're an expert in game mechanics. I don't know if you're going to want to comment, but I'd be curious to know what you think of the current game mechanics of most games that are coming out now, as well as the quality level overall of the offering in the marketplace today.
Sure. People like to play games for different reasons. And so if you like to click on, if it's a game where you just click, that's a game. People can sell that game and people can play that game and they can be happy. And I am happy that you're happy. That's not a game that I really like to play. But I do like casual games, like the Snake game where you go around Snake.io. It was popular a couple years ago. I still like that game. I accidentally, find one because I got kids, and so they'll be playing it, and I'll play it for a few minutes. Does that make me any less of a gamer because I like playing Snake a little bit? No, man. If you play games, you're a gamer. It's fine. I play Wordle 5 minutes a day every day. I've missed one day in the last 2 years or however long it's been out. And I love it. That doesn't make me less of a gamer just because I like word games. So that's thing one. Just because the mechanics aren't what we typically see in traditional games doesn't mean they're not games. So they're still games. Now, that said, there's a mass appeal that is missing from a lot of games that are still relatively young when it comes to GameFi and crypto games. Games like Axie, I think, have put forth more improvements than people kind of realize. People kind of checked it out and figured out what it was and then left it for a year and watched the number go up and back down. But a lot of those projects that did play to earn type stuff, they got huge treasuries, and now they're figuring out how do you make stuff fun. You know how to make stuff fun in gaming is you try it and you test it and you refine. It's this constant QA. Test it. See how it goes. Is it fun yet? Do people like it? No. What do we tweak? What do we fix? That's what games research and the games industry has showed us over the past 30 years is you iterate and you make it better and you make it better. So for the present, not all the games are super fun to me. But I don't like a lot of traditional games anymore. They're not super fun to me. They take too long to play. Like I'm old. I got stuff to do. I'd rather, go out and play hockey or something like that. But I still like them and there's still plenty of room for them. So, if game studios, one of the things that's a little bit different about game studios today is they have these communities with tokens and surrounding value that they're dealing with. And so games have a really hard time right now deciding what to build given their community. Because the community not only wants a fun game, but they also want number go up. And that's a hard thing for them to deal with, the game companies to deal with and balance. So we launched our game with no token. There's all free NFTs. You can mint as many as you want. Like there's no value associated with this very intentionally because we wanted to get at least the structure of a game before we're dealing with any of this stuff. But a lot of places didn't do that or they didn't know what they were getting into. And so all of a sudden they've got this community that is not only invested in the fun and the emotional relationship, but they're invested in financially in these platforms. And so now the game mechanics might be secondary to what a community asks for. Players don't always know what they want. Like some players do, but not all players do. And they might enjoy one part of a game and think they want more of it, but then it wrecks the balance of a game or it makes it less fun for a larger group of people. You also see this interesting dynamic come up in games with tokens and then also in casual games. A lot of the mobile casual games that you see are dictated, the player base might be huge, but really there's a small amount of whales that will go into a game and spend thousands of dollars over the course of a couple of months and sometimes tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And those are the people that the game designers are actually building for. You as a casual player, I go in, I play free. I think it's fun to play free because I want to see like how far I can get without paying anything. And if it's a fun game, I'll buy the intro package. I'll pay $2, $3, whatever. But they're not building the game for me. That they're not interested in how I feel about the game. Many game designers. And so when you take that to many of these GameFi games, it's the same thing. You've got communities of thousands, hundreds of thousands, but really maybe the game designers have to build it for 12 people or 100 people or a much smaller thing. And we don't always know what that looks like. So when it comes to the present, I think a lot of the GameFi games have a really tough challenge. And I don't envy those game designers because they walk in and they've got this super complex system right away that you tweak one thing and 10 other things break. And instead of just the game mechanics, it's also the economy and it's also your community. And it's also, guess what? The global macro economy now affects how people respond to your potion making game or whatever it happens to be. And those are tough challenges. So there's definitely room for improvement and people are building and trying things. Another thing I've seen though, as people build games, it's easier to get funding for a game and it's easier to build a team for a game if it's a game that people have seen before. So if you go and pitch a shooter, you can say that it's a shooter and here's how it's different from other shooters, or it's an RTS game. And here's how it's different from other RTS games. And so what you see a lot is copycat games, or you take the core idea of a game and then you modify it. That's fine. That's how the industry works, right? If you see most of the successful games on the sales charts in traditional gaming, they're all sequels, right? They're existing brands. It's really hard for a brand new brand to step out and be a first title and do well. It's exceedingly rare. Same in the film industry, same in TV and film. We just work on what humans already understand. What I think for gaming is a challenge with that is the fun new game mechanics of composability. Those don't exist in existing games quite the same. We got to do some new stuff. We got to be a little bit weird. And so how do we be weird enough and push the envelope and really try new game mechanics, yet attract enough players to make it worthwhile to fund a team? Honestly, I got to pay my devs. And so how do you do that and still build something new is tricky. So we do see a lot of mechanics that have been repeated before, and that's just kind of part of the process.
So I'm not totally sure how to ask this question, but I'm just going to ask anyways. I think it's fair to say that most people, for example, who play Blizzard games or who play Call of Duty or whatever, right? Most people who play games under the sort of Activision Blizzard game studio development company, those people, the majority of them, I think it would be safe to assume, do not own the stock of Activision Blizzard, right? But in this case, I think everybody who's playing some of these Web3 games are somewhat invested directly into these different games and game studios. What kind of interesting dynamics do you think this creates?
Well, I think that's really where GameFi, the term, and most of the early gameplay last year came from, is the token that I hold, I need to use to play the game, but the point of the game is to maximize the return of the token I hold. That's DeFi, right? It's like, I hold the governance token and I'm going to stake it and I'm going to get a yield, but then I'm going to bring other assets in and I'm going to get referral bonuses. There's just DeFi with like frog pictures on it, like that. Those were a lot of those games, and that's where a lot of the criticism came from, and the stuff that you guys were talking about early on. So that's one dynamic, is that changes the game. That makes it an economic game, which is a type of game. Like I said before, you play your games, you make games. Games are fun, but that limits the types of games that you can make, and if it limits the types of games you make, remember, there's many different types of players who play many different types of games. So it limits the types of players you're going to get. And it's a finite pool of people who are going to be interested in those kinds of games. I was really interested in those games for a little while, not too many of them. I played a couple, and then I saw the mechanics and was like, oh, this is all pretty much the same mechanic. I'm good. Like, I have one NFT from one of them because I didn't want to sell it. It was a fun period of my life, a couple weeks, and now I'm good. So I think that's one of the challenges, is if you have token and ownership that's a part of your gameplay, and generating that token is the point. If that's your gameplay, if the point of this is to make money, then that really limits your players. And so many of the projects, they say, well, we're going to make other types of games too. The challenge has been, and we haven't really seen projects that have solved this yet, is if there's a core group of players who are relying on token go up, and you're trying to reach a new group of players who just want to play for fun, how's that dynamic work? And so far haven't really seen strong evidence of how that'll work yet.
Well, and also, what do you do about the small number of massive whales versus the huge number of people who own virtually nothing of the currencies, right?
Yeah, and that's the same question as DeFi, right? Governance token it's distributed as equally as possible, but really there's a group of people who have way more, and that's the same question as VCs and early investment and early stage investment, and that's the same question as like early miners in a project. Early Bitcoin miners, they got a lot more Bitcoin because I didn't know how to do it right at the time, and I didn't care. Now there is inequality in the system, and maybe it was fair, and that's fine too. But like, there is inequality in systems. How do you address that? When it comes to making a product and making a game, that inequality does take on another dynamic, like we talked about before. Who am I building this game for? Am I building this game to make so my whales have fun? That's interesting. Now I'm building for a really small group of people. That's not going to change the world. But maybe I make this really fun for a group of people, and I've done my job as a designer. Or do I make this as fun as possible for as many people as possible and mitigate the impact of economic effects into the game? Okay, well, then what's going on with your token? Like, right, how does that affect your token? Those are legitimate questions for investors to ask too, because they've taken the risk as well. So it does add this dynamic to it that's hard to deal with. That is the same dynamic if you do a token or if you like do NFTs, right? If you mint out 10,000 NFTs and people are hoping those, have some elements in a system, all really similar dynamics there with ownership.
So you were a team member at Chainlink and decided to leave to launch Infinity Keys. Can you tell us a little bit about making that decision and your vision for Infinity Keys?
Yeah. I'm wearing my Chainlink Labs shirt. I love Chainlink. I had the opportunity to get into crypto full time. I was a writer for a while beforehand, and I worked for a fintech, and before then I was a professor of gaming. And so when I came to industry, when 2020 hit, I had the opportunity to join crypto Web3 full time. And so I was freelance writing, and then a couple of different job opportunities came up. So I worked for Status for a while. I wrote for Ava Labs for a while, and then there was a Chainlink job on the content team. And so I had the opportunity. They hired me on right in the middle of DeFi summer. And so it was, couldn't pass it up, right? Just an amazing time to work in the industry. And Chainlink Labs is a killer place to work. The people there are so focused and driven and mission oriented that it was a really strong lesson in like how to focus and how to work towards a common objective. And then while I was there, they were scaling too. They quadrupled in size practically. I think quadrupled in size of the time I was there. And so to see that up close and personal, and how does leadership do that, and how do we convey messages? And then on the content team, it was really seeing like, how do you get a consistent message across, and how do you build that with a product that's scaling at this? So fascinating time to be there. I love my time there, and I still have great friends that work at Chainlink Labs. I still love Chainlink very much. Last year in 2021, as the metaverse hype rose and the GameFi hype rose and NFTs, there's a fun idea I've had in my mind for a really long time about treasure hunts and mystery and puzzles and games, and not just me building them for other people or me finding them, but everybody being able to build them. I just think that's a really fun idea. And with all the hype last year, the opportunity arose to say, there's a way that we can make this work and be a legitimate business and a project and be self-sustaining. And now's the time. Like there's no other time I could have done it before. So I've had this vision for a very long time, and this idea of having community-led puzzles and people building things for others and being incentivized and a community. So it wasn't about leaving Chainlink. It was about pursuing something that I've been passionate about for a really long time with gaming, and having the chance to actually give it a go and go do that. So that's kind of what Infinity Keys is we are a platform where you can come and build your own mini games. Maybe it's a treasure hunt, maybe it's a riddle game, maybe it's like a traditional sort of word hunt or something in an iframe. And when people complete that game, then you can reward them with an NFT or a digital asset of some kind. And kind of where this takes, we got to do 2 level ups. So great. You give somebody a puzzle, you give them an NFT. Hooray, that's level 1. Level up number 1 is, well, I can actually take the NFT that I've awarded you and make that a requirement in another game. So I can build composable games, and I can do whatever, ask you to do whatever, and you've got to bring those NFTs together or digital assets together of some way as proof that you've accomplished these. So we can build these permissionless achievement systems. Okay, but not just the NFTs that I award. I can say, well, if you went and got a POAP, I can require that you got that POAP and make that part of my game, or any other NFT that we can see on a publicly accessible blockchain. Okay, so now we can build games using whatever digital assets there are, like we talked about. Go into a game and get a sword and bring it back, and it's a key as part of this puzzle. And then we really level it up. This is the 3rd stage, where we give that to the community. And now any person or a project, a brand, a fan, just a bag holder, anybody can come and build their own games that give out NFTs, and they can require those NFTs for other games. And now that composability, that web of games, can exist for anybody can do it whatsoever. So that's the idea, is as we build a platform for people to make games, those games will become interlaced, and we'll get more and more. And why does that matter? Well, if you go into virtual worlds that are really successful, World of Warcraft, Breath of the Wild, any RPG game that's done really well, Destiny. Oh, Destiny is what I was thinking of. There's so much depth of stuff to do because the quests and the characters and everything is interrelated. They're laced together so that it feels like this coherent narrative, this coherent place, and it feels like another world. That's what we're trying to build, is we let people lace those things together in a virtual world, metaverses, digital spaces, and those virtual experiences will start to feel a lot more real. To me, that's the metaverse. It's not a 3D area where you can walk around with an avatar. That can be part of it. That's fine. But what's interesting about metaverse experiences and virtual experiences is the feeling that there are legitimate and real things to do in virtual spaces. And that's what Infinity Keys, that's what we're trying to do, is build a platform where people can build those. Now, for the short term, we're doing that ourselves. You can come to our community and propose a puzzle. We've got a form and we'll put it up if we can. Or you can enter into a partnership with us. We take on clients and help them build puzzles for their communities, because there's a lot of cool things you can do with a community. But once we start putting those pieces out there, we can make these mini games however we want. Those pieces can then be put together in really interesting ways. And how does this community connect with the Rehash podcast? I'm a member of this DAO, Rehash, and we have a puzzle for them as well. Maybe there's some DAO NFTs that go together for a greater achievement. And if you've done that, like you're a real podcast listener, like you have some special status. We can do all sorts of stuff like that. We can combine them with real world activities too. We can pull in API data through oracles. That's why, like Chainlink, right? Pull in API data through oracles and say, when this happened in the real world, then you are issued this digital asset or this signature that verifies that you did something. And that's a piece of a game that not only we can make, anybody can make and require. So that's the design space. It's this they're composability games. And what do you want to do with that? How do you want to attach incentives to that is kind of secondary. Sure, they can be treasures. We can give people money, but I think it's more fun to build interesting games and connect them together, hide treasures once in a while, so that, there's always a little bit of a fun mystery. But it's a different sort of game and a different sort of activity that we're doing, really digging into the composability aspect of that.
It's a really interesting idea. It seems like a very unique way to kind of build up community.
That's why projects are using it now is especially last year, a project would build the treasury and build a community, and especially a game project. Okay, and now we need a year to build a game. But you got to keep that community. You can't lose them. But they're just sitting around. What are they doing? They're just waiting. And so build stuff for your communities to do. DeFi projects come and talk to us about the same thing. You got a community, and people can go and stake and do strategies. But what else can you do? Like, communities work together when they are together, and you build niche communities, and they have things in common, and they have stuff to do. And so it's a different type of content that you can build your own games for, whatever. We have a lot of fun with the different types of games that you can make. We do stuff with events as well. So we did things with SmartCon and DevCon, and Metaverse Miami is coming up as well. There's just all sorts of interesting things you can do. One of the things I'm most excited about, like, you can just give out a POAP for listeners as well. Like, POAPs do that sort of thing very, very well. POAPs are fantastic. If you're not familiar with them, proof of attendance protocol. And I don't want to step on POAP's toes. I love POAPs. What I want to do is I want to require POAPs in games. I want to link those things together so that people, if you have a project that you're really passionate about, if you're a bag holder, if you've got a bunch of NFTs for a collection, and you're just a collector, you should come and make puzzles that ask people to go and explore those things as well. So that as a community member, you can do a lot to give your project exposure. It doesn't have to be an official project or anything like that. It's permissionless. Let's just make games. It's fun.
Last question I have, just kind of building off what you just said. Do you think this could actually help if you built this in some way to prevent sort of like exploitation, or people who just want to take advantage of a system and run a bunch of bots on something?
There's a lot of we call it proof of work.
Yeah.
You've done the work. You have to go through and you have to solve it. You have to hold the NFT of the POAP that you went and got, and you have to figure out the answer to this thing. So yes is the short answer. The longer answer is building games like this are complicated because when you make a game, you're asking people to do stuff, and people don't have time to do all the stuff. So what's the right balance of stuff that we're asking you to do? And that's a really interesting game design question that I talk to my designers and advisors about all the time, is like, how hard is too hard? Because we got some real easy games. If you go and play some of the Infinity Keys games, you'd be like, that was super easy. I know how to do that. But the point is not to always to make you like work for it and get through it. Sometimes it's just to put up enough of a blocker to make you feel good and get you to the next one. And if you think about games and how they're actually designed, level 1, pretty easy, and it teaches you how to play. Level 2, a little harder, right? And it escalates. The challenge escalates. So So yes is the short answer. Is yeah, we can put things in the way to make sure that it's people and not bots, but then we also got to make it fun. We got to find a way for communities to come in and make those fun too. So that's our challenge as a business, and that's what we're working on the business side of things. Is and as a community is like, how do we have a community that helps create fun games and experiences for a variety of projects? And then we're also building infrastructure so people can come and just create a puzzle, a passcode puzzle, an NFT puzzle, whatever it happens to be. But great question and awesome use case. Whitelisting for NFT projects. You've gone through the white paper, you found the things. You've joined the right Discord channel. It's not just a simple "did you retweet this?" sort of stuff. A lot of opportunities there. We're very excited about. I am at Andy Boyan on Twitter, and at Infinity Keys is also on Twitter. We've got a Discord. Feel free to join if you need some help. If you try out some of the puzzles and you need help, come and talk. Remember, social is part of what we do, so you're welcome to chat about some of the puzzles that are a little harder. And if you want to design some games yourself, jump in the Discord. I'm in there. You can say hey to me and talk to our community about what puzzles they like, what challenges they like, and the sort of stuff we're building. Happy to have a conversation with anybody who really wants to talk about gaming and community building and this cool technology.
Very cool. This has been a super interesting conversation. We're at the end of our time now, so if anybody's still watching, just do all the things, leave a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, comment about it, tell us, what you think about this whole thing. All right, well, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time. Andy, thanks for coming on the show. Bye.
My pleasure. Peace.
Thanks a lot, Andy.